Like all television programmes, the news has a fixed length and time in the schedules. But clearly, not all the important events in the world can be neatly filed into a half-hour programme.
The fact is that the amount of information that comes into this building every day would produce 5 hours of news. We therefore have to select roughly half an hour of news, which we feel is the most important and the most relevant and the most interesting. So there is a process of selection.
Every day, news editors choose what we see as news.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. The police are about to arrest 26 British football fans who were involved in the riot at the Heysel Stadium in Belgium. The Belgians want to charge them with involuntary manslaughter. Extradition proceedings begin on Monday. 1,400 jobs are to go in the motor industry. General Motors are to stop making trucks and buses in Britain. A revolution soon on the roads. Instant fines for speeding and jumping the lights. Freedom and flowers for Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan. The fight goes on, she says.
A tremendous percentage of people get all their news information from the television news nowadays. It's 80 or 90% of people's awareness of world events and British events comes from their watching television news.
And that's the national and international news tonight. Good night.
Good night.
What picture of the world does television news give us?
I'd hope that it's a fair picture, that it's a picture of light, dark, and the shade. But at the end of the day, it's a highly selective picture, because we cannot be everywhere all of the time. We don't have enough people, and it costs far too much.
In a sense, we put a telephoto lens onto the world. We only show in close-up the things which are newsworthy. And they tend to be sad things, they tend to be events of disaster and gloom. It is a fact of life that an awful lot of what goes into the news is gloomy and disastrous and sad.
Who decides what's newsworthy? Every morning, all the editors from television news meet to discuss which stories they want in the programme.
What you pay if you drive at a certain speed, it'll now be on a scale, won't it? It'll now be on a sliding scale. That's interesting. People want to know that.
How do they decide what people want to know?
It's on the basis of a thing called news judgment. And that's something that people who are trained in journalism are trained to understand and spot. It's not a very precise science, but it is the way in which journalists are trained to say, this is an interesting story, it's relevant, we ought to tell the audience about this.
It's a judgment which is born of journalism, of reading papers every day, of reading magazines, of watching other television news programs.
It must be quite a closed world. It's bound to be, because these are people working under terrific pressure. And the important thing for them is going to be, how do other people who read and film news, what do they think of the work that I'm doing?
Journalists generally agree about what is or isn't newsworthy. But how do they decide what makes a story newsworthy?
In the week that we are speaking, there was a hijacking of an airliner at Karachi airport. Pan Am aircraft, and many people died as a result of what happened at Karachi. That quite clearly is a major story, a story of great interest, and a story of worldwide interest. It's not just of interest in Pakistan, of course it's of interest in this country for a number of reasons. Hijacking is of interest to all of us. There were Britons on board, and therefore that's of interest. People in this country are not terribly keen on foreign news reporting. They want stories from the United Kingdom, they want stories from Britain, but they don't want a lot of the foreign stories. Now, that's just unacceptable. I think it's terribly important that we put onto our news programmes stories about the rest of the world, major events in the rest of the world, how the world is developing.
First, the main points of the news. A plane crashed in Spain today, killing all of its 350 passengers. 2 Britons were among the dead. In Peru, an earthquake has brought devastation to the village of Santa Maria. Homes and shops were destroyed and 14 people were killed. But it doesn't matter much because they were all South American. It's an awfully long way away. A bomb went off last night in the bar of the Hilton Hotel in Cairo. No Britons were killed, but the dead include, in order of importance, 2 Americans, 3 South Africans and 1 Australian. A Frenchman was also among the dead, but his English wasn't very good.
decides what's newsworthy and how? News editors decide which are the most important stories, which one will make the front page of a newspaper or the lead item of a news programme.
Right, we're in need of a fairly strong lead story. Bedford is quite strong, and nearly 1,500 jobs going is powerful stuff, but the summit may push itself to the top again. It really depends on more news from Washington.
What you decide to lead on is lent an enormous amount of importance. If you say, good evening, the headline's at 6 o'clock, there's been a train crash in Scotland, then people will think, there's been a train, this must be terrible. You know, there must be lots of people dead, something like that. If one story in or two stories in, you say, a train has crashed in Scotland, a cow is on the line, it's immediately a much lighter business.
OK, we've now got to change to our lead, a new story at 5 and 6. Page 5 is Heysel, as in Heysel Stadium. 26 kids arrested for...
As the production team prepare their scripts for the 6 o'clock news,